Hey, how's it going everyone? It's Evil Monkey here, back with another build video, and this one's for Harris, who has just been demolishing Onslaught. I've been hard carrying level 3 Onslaughts with her, and she's just been phenomenal. It's thanks to her insane mobility, her incredible survivability, and her crazy damage that just got buffed in the recent patch. I'm talking incredible damage. I've had matches where I'm ending with 60 to 70 billion damage in a 4-man squad. I have been topping the damage every match I've played. She's just been phenomenal. And thanks to that insane mobility that she has, you can cover multiple points. You don't have to just protect one side. In fact, on the third map, I've been able to cover all 3 points for the enemies to come in. It has just been insane. I've been loving Harris for Onslaught. But that's enough of me yapping, because I've been yapping a little bit too long here. Let's get you guys into that build so you can get out there with Harris. Now, as always, we gotta start off with our mod section, where I'll go ahead and break down each mod and explain why we're using it and how it fits into the build. But before we jump into all the rest of the mods, some people may have noticed that we're not running a transient mod here. So there's no, Descendant class mod there. And there is a reason for that. And that's because there is no really good transient mod for Harris to run for a more skill power / ability build, since she only has 2 transient mods. One turns her into more of a support character where it takes away a lot of her scalings and lowers her damage by a large amount, and the other one for her transient mods turns her into a gun character. You're not really much of a skill power ability character, you're more of a gun running gun descendant. So instead, the best option for an ability-based Harris where you're relying on your abilities to do all your damage is to actually go without a transient mod. I just wanted to explain that real quick in case anyone was curious, but let's go ahead and jump into the rest of our mods. And starting off our mods will be our skill power section, with our first module being power increase. Now, why are we running power increase? Well, this just gives a lot of skill power increase, but some people may be wondering why we're not running something like Toxic Specialist, which gives a lot of toxic skill power boost, since Harris is a toxic character. Well, that has to deal with the damage formula for Descendant, but the short version of it is you basically want to balance each of your skill power pools. In this case, it'd be basic skill power, toxic skill power, and fusion skill power, and we'll also be adding a little bit of tech skill power in there as well. But to maximize damage, you want to balance all 3 of those first ones to be as high as possible without lowering any of the other ones. In this case, we get a lot of toxic skill power from other resources, so we're taking power increase because of the skill power increase we want here to kind of balance those out. Speaking of toxic skill power, our next one, toxic amplification, is one of the ways that we actually get a lot of toxic skill power. Now, we're running this, of course, because, Harris is a toxic character, and Harris is not a crit character. She has a base crit of 5%, which is incredibly low. And to get that anywhere near 100%, you'd need about 1900% multiplicative crit scaling. So unless you're running like a support Luna to give you additional skill crit rate, which would be additive, which that would allow you to hit 100% crit rate, you really don't want to run on Harris, since especially how crit works in First Descendant with crit resistance, it's just not very efficient, especially considering our main damage ability, which would be our 4th ability, is on about a 4-second cooldown. It's just not worth the risk because you'll jump in and then you just won't do any damage because you didn't land a crit. And while sometimes if you do land a crit, it would allow for a very high damage number, it's just too inconsistent, at least in my opinion. So we get rid of crit here. Another reason is also if you were to run crit, you'd have to get rid of some modules in this build, and all the modules have a place here, since crit would require 4 crit modules. So once again, it's just not worth it in my opinion. Thus, non-crit. Next up, we have focus on fusion. Now, Harris has really high scalings, so we're not really running this for scaling. In fact, the only one this kind of impacts is the poison on your 3rd ability. Instead, we're almost running this purely for the cooldown. We do hit 90% cooldown with this build, so we really do want this little bit of extra cooldown to get us to that. But we'll talk about that more when we get to the cooldown modules. And then, finally, Dangerous Ambush. Now, this one does give you a lot of increased skill power, And some people may have a lot of questions about this. So the quick version of it, because we'll probably answer the question about it, no, your first ability does not proc Dangerous Ambush by itself. Even though, yes, it does apply toe, because the skill is not actually qualified as a toe skill, I believe this is why it's not counted as actual immobilize. Normally, toe effect does actually cause Dangerous Ambush to trigger, but in this case it doesn't. Instead, you do have an ability that causes an incredibly high amount of immobilize, and that's your second ability, the one you know you're using to get across the map, and you're often using it because it's high damage scaling. In fact, you'll be spamming out your second ability a lot. Well, it turns out this one also has a 3-second stun on it, which perfectly sets up Dangerous Ambush. And it's in a very wide AoE with how much skill range we're running. So this really just sets up pretty much you to clear out any wave. In fact, the combo will usually be you jump in with your second ability, and then you use your fourth ability to just instantly delete a wave. Now, I'll show examples of this and how to use it in the tips and tricks section, but yeah, your second ability will set up all your other abilities to have massively increased damage. Also, as a real quick side note, if you don't want to go through the trouble of setting up Dangerous Ambush because you don't use your second ability as much, there's one alternative called Firepower Conversion. This works with Steel Vanguard, and this also gives you increased skill power. It's just only about half as much as Dangerous Ambush would give, so you really do want to run Dangerous Ambush because it will be a large damage increase. I think around a 10 million damage difference from when I was practicing the practice tool. So definitely, Dangerous Ambush is much better, and I feel like it synergizes much also better with the gameplay style of Harris. But Firepower Conversion is a alternative you can run. Now, along with skill power, Harris also gets damage from our HP, which is our next section. Starting with our first module, which is increased HP, now we're just running this because this is your basic HP module, it gives a lot of HP with no downside. And then we're running Stim Accelerant, because this gives the most HP out of any module in the game, with the only downside being minus max MP. But Harris does not have MP, she only has her custom resource, and this doesn't affect her custom resource at all. So she just gets to run this module for free. Now, as I said, she also gets damage from her HP, and this is because all 4 of her abilities have HP scaling. In fact, I believe it's 126% increased damage if you max it out. And we're able to max it out with this build. In fact, we kind of go way overboard on HP for survivability's sake. But you only need to hit, I believe it's somewhere between 26 to 28,000 HP to hit the max value. And we get above 30,000 with this build. Now, we are actually running that mage HP for a really good reason. Mainly, it's because your second ability has a shield that you get. Well, it's called an overshield in this case. And it's based off your max HP. And so anytime you dash in with your second ability, which you'll pretty much do all the time, you get a very massive shield. In fact, I don't believe I've gone down at all in level 3 Onslaught with Eris, because you just have this insane amount of survivability with this. In fact, you can just face tank the Colossi at the end of Onslaught. I do it all the time. Then survivability here is just insane. It's crazy how much survivability you have. And then the other reason you want it is because Steel Vanguard, which is a trigger module we'll be running, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, also has HP scaling, meaning it also increases that damage. Meaning HP is just a god tier stat on Harris, and that's why we run so much. This also just allows you to be kind of a mage bruiser and save allies who get downed, survive waves. You can just kind of ignore bosses and tyrants because, I mean, they're not going to eat through your HP. It just is such a good stat on her. Now, to get all this increased survivability from your second ability, we really want to be able to spam it out a lot. Meaning we need a lot of cooldown, which brings us into our next section, our cooldown section. Starting off with MP Conversion, this one's going to be similar to Stim Accelerant. This gives us an incredible amount of cooldown, with the only downside being minus max MP, and as we stated, Harris doesn't have MP, so it's all good. We just get to run this for free. Then next up is Nimble Fingers. It's just your basic cooldown module. It gives you a lot of cooldown with no downside. Now, between these mods and a few other locations in the build and Harris's passive, we're actually able to hit max cooldown, which would be 90%. And this is massive because, well, number one, just be able to spam out more abilities means a lot more damage. But Harris also has some utility from her abilities, such as her second ability giving her survivability, and her third ability also giving her increased movement speed. But the main reason we want so much cooldown is because Harris's passive gives her 3 different buffs, and each of those buffs you get depending on how full her custom resource bar is. And so the idea is you constantly want to fill up your resource bar and then completely deplete it, and keep doing that over and over again, so you're constantly refreshing these 3 buffs, because the buffs are fairly massive, with your first one giving you stuff like increased HP and cooldown, and your third one giving you stuff like increased skill power, and all 3 also give you damage reduction taken. So you really just want to have these constantly up, and the best way to do that, once again, is just constantly refresh them. This also allows us to bear, once again, to be able to spam over our abilities. So you really want to hit this 90% cooldown, especially since then we can also use our 4th as much as possible, and your 4th ability is an insane wave clear ability with something like a 7,000 to 8,000% scaling, so it just kind of deletes most things in the game. And then next up is our range section, and for this we're only going to run skill expansion. This is your basic skill range up mod, and it has no downside, making it pretty good to run. And between this one and our Arche Tree, we're actually able to hit max range, which is always good, because this just allows us to hit more enemies with our abilities, and helps with wave clear. And then finally for our Ancestor module, we'll go ahead and move this to its own section, as we always do, where we'll go ahead and take every Ancestor module stat that you can roll and put into a tier chart that you guys can use a reference if your Ancestor module is good, or if you want to go ahead and re-roll it. Now if you guys want to jump to that right now, there's a link in the description down below. There's also a timestamp in the timeline that you can use to jump to it as well. And with all of our main modules out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into our trigger module. Now for this one, we'll be running Steel Vanguard, and this is because Harris can proc it incredibly easily with her first and second ability, since both those are Clash, and we'll be spamming those a lot with this build. Also, Harris has a lot of HP already in her kit from our mod section, since we need those scale up our abilities, and as I stated before, Steel Vanguard also has HP scaling, meaning you get damage from this as well just by already having the build done. So the HP not only scales up for normal damage, but this as well. And then the final big reason why we really want to run Steel Vanguard, it turns out the damage from Steel Vanguard damages Arche overshields. The thing that you constantly see in Onslaught, yes, Steel Vanguard actually damages both types of Arche shields. This is something I've tested before, so this just helps a lot with being able to eat through those waves and not have to worry about those shields as much. So the utility on this is just amazing just because of that reason alone. Now let's go ahead and hop into our Ancestor module section, where we'll go ahead and take all the stats you can roll in your Ancestor module, break them down, and go ahead and put them into a tier chart, where you guys can go ahead and reference that to determine if you want to keep your Ancestor module, or if you want to go ahead and re-roll it. Now, I do want to make a quick note about the Ancestor module for this Harris build. Because this build pretty much has all the stats it needs, you know, with max cooldown, max range, so on and so forth, the main stats we really want here are ones that increase our damage. In fact, starting with S tier here, we have our first one, which is Fusion Skill Power Boost, which is going to be your largest damage increase, since your third and fourth abilities scale off Fusion, and those are our main damage abilities. And then next we also have Toxic Skill Power Boost, which, since Harris is a toxic character, we really want this one because it just also increases your damage by a lot. And then going on to A tier, we have Tech Skill Power Boost ratio. Now, we have this one because your first and second abilities are actually Tech, and because they scale off of Tech, this will raise their damage by a lot. And just for reference, an ideal Ancestor module would look like Fusion Skill Power Boost ratio, Toxic Skill Power Boost ratio, and Tech Skill Power Boost ratio. If you have all 3 of these on an Ancestor module, they're going to really ramp up your damage by a lot, and it's the ideal one you can roll. And next up we have Max HP. Now we just have this one up here because, as we say before, Max HP is a really efficient stat thanks to your second ability giving you an overshield based off your max HP, so it's just a really good stat to roll. And then for our middle of the pack values, B tier, we have Skill Cooldown. Now this one's here because even though we hit 90% cooldown, if you were to roll in your Ancestor module, you could technically remove cooldown from a few places in your kit. and then replaces them with more HP, which, as just stated, was a really good value. And we have tech skill modifier and fusion skill modifier. Now, Harris has really high scalings on basically every single scaling in her kit. So these don't really ramp up your damage by a lot, that's why they're in B tier. But they do still increase your damage, so they're okay to roll. And then of course we have defense, and that's just more survivability, so it's never a bad thing to roll. And now for C tier, this is the tier you just kind of want to avoid taking these values, because even if you take them as a positive, they don't help the build too much. And if you take them as a negative, they actually hurt the build a lot. With our first one being skill cost. Now the reason we want to avoid this one has to do with Harris's custom resource bar and her passive buffs, since as we talked about before, you really want to cycle through your custom resource bar, constantly depleting it and refilling it. If you reduce the cost of your abilities too much, you get to the potential point where you just have trouble actually depleting your resource bar compared to how much you generate. And if you increase the costs, well, you may accidentally hit a point to where your abilities cost too much and you can't properly deplete it through that either, or you can't cast your abilities enough. Especially since you want to be able to cast your fourth ability back to back since it stacks twice. Then, our next one is skill effect range. Now, this one's really simple. We already hit max skill effect range. We don't need any more. And there's no real point on rolling it here. It would just be significantly worse than rolling any other stat here. And then, time for D tier. Now, D tier, these don't really help the build at all. So these are the perfect ones to take as negative values, since, once again, they really don't impact the build at all. Now, the first one is skill duration up. Now, this one may seem a little odd since I constantly talk about you really want those passive buffs constantly going. Well, with this build, you'll be constantly refreshing those buffs, so it doesn't really matter if you lower their duration. Since you're constantly refreshing them, they'll always be up. And the only thing else this could affect is your third ability, and because we're running such low cooldowns, you can just constantly cast it again. You don't have to worry about the duration being lower. And then we have skill critical hit damage and skill critical hit rate. Now, these two are here because, of course, we talked in the mod section. Harris is not a crit character. She just has too low of base values in crit. So instead, we'll go ahead and take these as negatives if we can on our Ancestor modules, since they don't do anything with the build. Then max shield. Now, max shield is just plain simple. Harris scales a lot better with max HP, so we don't really care about max shield. We can just get rid of that one. And that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for the tier chart. Hopefully this will help you guys determine if you want to keep those Ancestor modules or re-roll them. And with all of our mods sections out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into our Arche Tree. Now, for this Arche Tree, we're mainly just going to focus on increasing our damage. That's why we're grabbing the gold skill node off on the right there. And we're mainly just grabbing skill power nodes as well. But we also need to grab the gold cooldown node so that we can hit 90% cooldown, which is the max cooldown rate. Now, once again, this is because Harris needs a lot of cooldown to be able to cycle through her custom resource bar, proc all three of her passives, and you want to have those constantly up. So you constantly need to drain and refill that resource bar. Then we're also going to grab the purple HP node at the bottom there. It's just because, once again, HP is a really effective stat on Harris. Now, for your Mutant Cells in this build, you actually have two different options. You're going to have the option of Corrosive Overshield, which is the one that I generally run, because it's just a large increase of toxic skill power that you can easily proc with your second ability, and it's just good for overall general use. And then the second option that you can run is Toxin Chain Catalyst. Now, this is really good if the enemies have very high resistances, because this will allow you to shred their toxic resistance, allowing you to just do a lot more damage to them. And next, let's go over our component set for this build. Now, we'll be running Plague Set for this one, and this is mainly because you generate toxic skill power boost just by generating custom resource, which, as we said before, Harris does all the time, and you want to do this so that you can constantly activate your passives on Harris, which gives you a whole bunch of different stat boosts. And on top of this, Plague Set also gives tech skill power boosts, which is huge because your first and second abilities scale off tech, so this just increases their damage as well. Now, some people may be wondering why we're running Plague Set over Hazmat Set, which technically at max stacks Hazmat gives about 2% additional toxic damage over Plague Set, and also has 10% cooldown you can get. Well, this is because, number one, Plague also increases our tech skill power, which is more damage for our first and second abilities. But the other main reason is because it doesn't actually feel good to get cooldown through Hazmat. You have to generate it by using one of your abilities, which means when you initially jump into the fight, that ability is going to be put on a longer cooldown, and you're going to have to wait for that to come back up. Also, if your stacks ever drop off, once again, those abilities are going to be put on longer cooldown. Instead, we already hit 90% cooldown through this build naturally, and with Harris's passive, which feels much better when you're constantly at the 90%, because then you're not having to wait for any cooldowns at all during the fight. So it just feels better, and you do get technically more damage from running Plague over Hazmat. Now, for your substats you're going to want to run here, we're going to want max HP and HP recovery. These are the only two that matter. And then going on to our component cores, what you're going to want to run is 4 max HP cores. This is because, once again, HP is just stupidly efficient on Harris, for all the reasons we went over in the mod section. And then for your other 4 cores, you're going to want at least 2 defensive cores, and the other 2 can be free cores that you change out depending on what you're fighting. So if you're fighting toxic enemies, you can throw toxic cores in there, fire enemies, fire cores, so on and so forth. Or if you want a good old general stat, just go ahead and throw in 4 defensive cores. This is why I run, and just makes it good across the board. And then let's go on to our Inversion Reinforcement. Now, for your first one you're going to run here is Adrenaline Surge. Movement speed is always good, and it just increases it. And if you do want to change this one out, you are perfectly fine to change out Adrenaline Surge, since we do get movement speed from other resources. But it's just kind of the best node out of everything that's left. Unless you're going to go more weapon focused, then I'd recommend changing this out for a weapon one. And next, in recovery, is going to be selective cellular stimulation, and this is just a nice heal. We run a lot of HP, so getting more HP heal is always good. And then deploy Hardened Shell. Since we already have enough HP, this is just really good because it gives percentile reduced damage taken. And once again, you have so much HP that this just makes the HP way more efficient. Now let's go over the reactor we'll be running in this build. So for Harris, we'll be running a Toxic Fusion Reactor because Harris is a toxic character, and your third and fourth abilities scale off fusion, with your fourth ability being the highest damage ability Harris has, so we really want to ramp that up as much as possible. And then for your substats, we'll be running Toxic Power Boost and Fusion Power Boost. And now for the weapons you want to run in this build, there are actually going to be 2 weapons we're going to be running. The first one is Secret Garden, and second one is Hypernova. Now, the reason we're running Secret Garden here is because this is just basically going to be a stat stick. Secret Garden's special ability that gives you stacking skill power every time you use a tech ability, or at least you have a set chance to, is really good on Harris considering we're spamming our first and second abilities, which are tech. Meaning you're pretty much going to permanently have this stacked as long as you have Secret Garden equipped. Now, because we're only using this for its passive, we're going to go pretty bare bones on it. You'll only need to run 3 sprint cores on this, and 1 module that'll be Brisk Walk. This will help you get capped out on movement speed, so that's pretty good. Then, for Hypernova, there's 2 reasons we're running Hypernova here. The first one is Hypernova's special attack, the one that causes, the giant toe ability, counts as Immobilize, meaning it gives us another way to set up dangerous ambush that we're running for our mod section, beyond our second ability. Which means it synergizes really well with this build. The second reason is because in Onslaught, there's a lot of people with Arche overshields, and those are really annoying to pop unless you have a weapon prepped for it. Which we're doing that with Hypernova, and we're doing that by running Veil Analyzer, which is really, really important here. Now, we're not going to go super in depth into this build, because it's a fairly standard Hypernova build. I'm going to show everything on the screen there, with the cores, options, and the mods. But the most important thing here with Hypernova is to make sure you run that Veil Analyzer. This will allow you to pop both types of Arche shields with Hypernova, and you can mainly do that just by throwing out its second ability, or its special ability, however you want to say it. And this will not only destroy the bubbles in about 1 to 2 procs of its damage, but as soon as their shields are popped, it will also clump them all up, immobilize them, and be a perfect setup for your 4th ability to just delete whatever's in your sword's special ability. And finally, time for the tips and tricks section, where I'll show you guys a few things to kind of help you along with Harris. So, the first thing I want to show you guys is when you get into a match, the first thing you should do every time is press your first ability. The reason why is this generates just a little bit of your custom resource bar, as you guys can see, and it activates your first passive, which is the most important one, since that gives you a whole bunch of good stats, such as getting us to max cooldown. So that's very important to trigger, and this will kind of set up a lot of the start of the dungeon for you. The next thing I wanted to show you guys was, I mentioned this back in the mod section, I'd show you guys how to do dangerous ambush and kind of play out for this. So I'll summon a guy there, get full energy. What you want to do is you want to kind of jump here, jump on them, you stun them, they're immobilized, you get the increased damage. So you guys saw 65, and without this, it's 58. So you get a large amount of increased damage there. That's just kind of an important thing to know. And because you have 90% cooldown, you can just kind of keep doing that and keep getting increased damage. And this kind of lets you just jump around the battlefield a lot. It's really good, especially dealing with those really high health tanky targets. Just kind of shreds a lot of enemies. The next thing I wanted to show you guys was, I talked about having the same mobility that kind of helps you get around the battlefield a lot. There's one cool thing you can kind of do. So let's get full energy again. So it turns out for your 3rd ability, you get kind of some hang time there. And if you do it right, you can kind of just get a bird's eye view. And because it refreshes part of your cooldown if you don't actually hit an enemy, and thanks to our 90% cooldown, your 2nd ability just goes immediately off cooldown. You can just keep casting it back to back. This kind of lets you get an overall view of the map and what's going on. If you need to jump to any other location, especially in Onslaught where there's a lot of crazy stuff happens, getting that kind of bird's eye view helps a significant amount. And then the last thing I wanted to show you guys, since I've talked a lot about the custom resource bar and that you have to manage it, if you guys are having trouble depleting your custom resource bar, your 3rd ability is the best thing for that. Since, as you guys can see on max, your 3rd ability actually just constantly drains your custom resource bar. This will just allow you to get it back up to empty. Well, just about empty. And as you guys can see, I got all 3 of my buffs there. It's just like a nice little thing you guys are having trouble managing that custom resource bar. And it's not hard to get refilled. You can just spam out your first ability like so. You don't even have to hit an enemy to get that. That's just a nice little thing for that. Anyways, that's all the things I want to show you guys there. Once again, it's just kind of help you guys with Harris's playstyle a little bit so you can get the most out of the build. And let's go ahead and wrap up for this build video. Now, I've been enjoying this Harris build a lot. Playing as a bruiser mage has been a lot of fun and has insane carry potential. Like I said, I've been carrying level 3 onslaughts with this build pretty easily and topping the damage chart every single time. They really did nail it with these buffs, making her kind of one of the top descents in the game in my opinion. But let me know what you guys think about the build down in the comments below, or if you have any questions, they'll set me up down below as well. And if you enjoyed the video or plan to use the build, I'd appreciate you hitting that like button. It helps the video out a lot. If you want to know when new videos are coming out, don't forget that subscribe button. Also, I stream most days on Twitch. I'll go ahead and throw up the information on the screen there. We've been doing a lot of Onslaught. I'm really enjoying this game mode. It's a lot of fun. And once again, if you guys could hit that like button, it really does help the video get out to a lot more people. So I'd appreciate that. And that's going to go ahead and wrap up this video. Appreciate y'all watching, and I'll catch y'all again later.